She signs a marriage contract with a mafia boss to save her family from bankruptcy. But she doesn't know that his enemies have been pulling the strings, pushing her to the brink from the start. On her wedding night, instead of fear, she receives 4 words. You're safe. But that safety doesn't last. Because Nikolai Vasov, the man who wants to destroy her, has just discovered his only weakness. Her. If you want to know whether Lena survives or is devoured by the underworld, follow the story to the end. Hit like and comment the name of the city you're watching. Let me know how far this story has progressed. The fluorescent light above the front desk had been flickering for 3 weeks. Lena Hartwell noticed it every night, the way it stuttered and buzzed, like something dying slowly that nobody had the decency to put down. She stood behind the counter at 11:42 on a Tuesday, watching rain slide down the lobby windows of the Hartwell Grand Hotel, which hadn't been grand in a very long time. The marble floor was cracked near the elevators. 2 of the 6 chandeliers had gone dark months ago because replacement bulbs cost more than the hotel earned in a week. The leather chairs in the waiting area had split at the seams, foam pushing through like something wounded trying to escape its own skin. She was 26 years old and she looked 35. Not from age, from the weight she carried behind her eyes. The kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix because it lived somewhere deeper than muscle and bone. It lived in the part of her brain that did math at 3 in the morning, adding numbers that never added up, subtracting options until nothing remained. The phone rang. She picked it up knowing exactly who it was. Miss Hartwell, this is David Chen from Pacific Mutual Lending. His voice was polished smooth, a voice trained to deliver devastation like it was customer service. I'm calling to confirm that the foreclosure proceedings will move forward at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning unless full payment is received before... I know what the deadline is, Lena said. A pause. We've extended this courtesy multiple times now. Courtesy? She almost laughed. You call threatening to take a building that's been in my family for 63 years a courtesy. Miss Hartwell, the balance is $1.2 million. The property has been leveraged against... I know what it's been leveraged against. I know every number. I know every decimal point. I've been staring at them for 8 months. Another pause, longer this time. Then you understand our position. She understood their position. She just couldn't do anything about it. 9 a.m., Chen repeated. I'm sorry. He wasn't sorry. She hung up and pressed both palms flat against the counter, leaning forward until her arms shook. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark marble. A woman in a wrinkled blouse, hair pulled back in a knot that was coming undone, shadows carved beneath her cheekbones. The hotel was empty. Not just tonight. It had been empty for weeks. The last permanent guest had checked out in March. The restaurant closed in January. The pool had been drained after the heating system failed and nobody could afford to fix it. One by one, every piece of what her grandfather built had been stripped away, sold off, shut down, until all that remained was a hollow building with a woman standing inside it who refused to leave. Lena walked through the back corridor to the small office behind the kitchen. Her father sat in a wheelchair near the window, blanket over his legs, staring at nothing. Gerald Hartwell had suffered a stroke 4 months ago. The second one in a year. The doctors said stress was killing him. The irony wasn't lost on her. The debt was giving him strokes, and the strokes made it impossible for him to help fight the debt. Dad. He turned his head slowly. His left eye drooped. His mouth pulled to one side when he tried to speak, and the words came out blurred and broken, like a radio signal through static. Lena, what time? Almost midnight. The call. She hesitated. They confirmed. Tomorrow morning. He closed his eyes. A sound came from his throat. Not a word, not a cry. Something in between. Something that sounded like a man watching his entire life collapse and knowing he caused it. Gerald Hartwell had not always been a broken man in a wheelchair. 10 years ago, he ran this hotel with sharp instincts and a firm handshake. He expanded. He borrowed. He trusted the wrong people. Partnered with investors who smiled while they drained his accounts. Signed contracts he didn't read carefully enough because he believed men still honored their word. By the time he realized the money was gone, the debt had multiplied into something monstrous. One bad investment led to another. Then the loans. Then the second mortgages. Then the lenders who charged interest rates that should have been illegal and probably were, but nobody with enough power cared. Lena sat on the edge of his desk. I called everyone. The banks won't restructure. Uncle Martin won't return my calls. The city council denied the landmark petition. Gerald's hand trembled on the armrest. Your mother's hotel. I know. She built the garden, the fountain. His voice broke. She planted every flower herself. Dad, stop. I destroyed it. You didn't? I destroyed everything she built. His eyes were wet, red-rimmed, and the anger in them wasn't directed outward. It was the quiet, corrosive kind that turns inward and eats a man alive. She would look at me now and she would look at you and still love you, Lena said, sharper than she intended. That's what she did. That's what I'm doing. So stop. He went quiet. The rain drummed against the window. Lena pulled up her laptop and opened her email for the 100th time, scrolling through rejections and silence. Then she saw it, an email from an address she didn't recognize, VK Associates. No subject line, no introduction, just 4 sentences. Miss Hartwell, we represent a private party interested in resolving your family's financial situation in full. A meeting has been arranged tomorrow at 8 a.m. at the Elysian Club, Suite 7. Attendance is requested. No name, no details, no explanation of how they knew about the debt, the timeline, the foreclosure, just a location and a time. Lena stared at the screen. Every instinct she had told her this was wrong. Meetings with unnamed parties in private clubs at dawn. That was the kind of thing that happened in stories about people who disappeared. But 9 a.m. was the deadline, and 8 a.m. was the only window left. She closed the laptop. The Elysian Club sat on the 14th floor of a steel and glass tower in the financial district, the kind of building that existed specifically to remind everyone below it who had the power. Lena arrived at 7:53, wearing the only blazer she hadn't sold, her hands damp inside her pockets. The elevator opened onto a corridor lined with dark wood and low amber lighting. A man in a tailored gray suit stood at the end, hands clasped in front of him. He was maybe 50, clean-shaven, with the posture of someone who had spent decades standing at attention. Miss Hartwell. Who are you? My name is Alexei. I'll take you to the meeting. I asked who you are, not your name. The faintest crack of amusement crossed his face. I work for the man you're about to meet. This way. He led her through a set of double doors into a private suite. The room was spare, almost austere. Dark carpet, a single long table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Rain streaked the glass. The city below looked small and gray and indifferent. At the far end of the table sat a man. Nikolai Vasov was not what she expected. She had expected old. He was maybe 32. She had expected fat, dripping with gold, a caricature of underworld excess. Instead, he was lean, sharp-featured, with dark hair cut short and eyes the color of slate that held an unsettling stillness. He wore a black shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled to the forearms, and the only jewelry on him was a watch with a scratched face that looked like it had survived something its owner didn't talk about. He didn't stand when she entered. He studied her with the focused calm of someone who had already decided everything and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. Sit, he said. I'll stand. His eyebrow moved a fraction of an inch. Sit, Miss Hartwell. This conversation is going to take longer than your pride can hold you upright. She sat, not because he told her to, because her knees were already trembling and she didn't want him to see. Alexei closed the doors and stood against the wall like a piece of furniture that happened to breathe. You know my name, Nikolai said. It wasn't a question. No. Then I'll tell you, Nikolai Vasov. If the name means something to you, good. If it doesn't, it will by the time you leave this room. She kept her hands flat on the table. What is this about? Your debt. $1.2 million owed to Pacific Mutual. Another $300,000 in secondary liens. Your father's medical bills. Unpaid for 4 months. The property taxes. Delinquent since September. I know what you owe because I had someone calculate it. The total is $1.7 million, give or take whatever your grocery bill was this week. Lena's stomach turned. How do you know? I know because knowing is what I do. He leaned forward, and the movement was so controlled it looked rehearsed, except it wasn't. Here's what I'm offering. I pay everything. The hotel, the medical bills, the liens. Every cent your father owes disappears by noon today. The foreclosure stops. The building stays in your family. The silence that followed was so thick she could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. In exchange for what? Marriage. The word hit the air like a slap. Marriage, she repeated. A contract, 2 years. You live in my residence. You appear publicly as my wife at functions and events where my image requires stability. You fulfill no duties beyond that. No expectations, no obligations. After 24 months, the contract ends. You walk away with the hotel, clear title, and a settlement of $250,000. Lena stared at him. You're insane. Possibly, but I'm also your only option, and we both know it. I don't know you. You know enough. You know I can write a check right now that solves every problem you've had for the past 2 years. You know nobody else is offering that. Why? Why me? He paused. For the first time since she walked in, something shifted behind his eyes. Not softness, exactly, but a crack in the granite. Because I need a wife who has no connection to my world. Someone clean. Someone the outside sees and believes the picture. And because... He stopped. Because what? Because your situation guarantees you'll say yes, and I prefer certainty. The honesty of it hit her harder than the proposal itself. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't seducing. He was transacting, and the currency was her desperation. I need to think about... You have 40 minutes before the foreclosure filing goes through. He placed a folder on the table. The contract is here. Every term is written. Read it. If you sign, I make a call and your father keeps his building. If you don't... He shrugged, not cruelly, practically, like a man describing weather. If you don't, I walk away and you lose everything by lunch. Lena opened the folder. Her eyes moved across the pages, but the words blurred. 2 years. Public appearances. Separate living quarters within the residence. No physical obligations. A monthly allowance. Full medical coverage for her father. Legal dissolution after 24 months with no contest. It was clinical, sterile. Like a business merger documented in legalese, except the merger was her life. She looked up. If I do this, my father never finds out what you are. Nikolai's jaw tightened. Your father will know what I tell him, which is that I'm a private investor who fell in love with his daughter. He won't believe that. He will. Because the alternative is believing his daughter married a criminal to save him, and that will kill him faster than any stroke. The cruelty of the truth sat between them like a living thing. Lena picked up the pen. Her hand shook. She thought about her mother, who died when Lena was 19, who spent her last months in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and failure, while insurance companies sent rejection letters. She thought about her father, slumped in a wheelchair, watching the thing his wife built crumble because he trusted people who didn't deserve it. She thought about the lobby with the flickering light and the cracked marble and the empty chairs. She signed. Nikolai didn't smile. He didn't react at all. He simply closed the folder, slid it to Alexei, and said, "Make the calls." 3 days later, Lena Hartwell became Lena Vassoff in a private ceremony at a courthouse downtown. There were no flowers, no music, no guests except Alexei, who served as witness, and a court clerk who looked bored and smelled like cigarette smoke. Lena wore a navy dress she'd bought at a department store that morning. Nikolai wore a dark suit that probably cost more than her car. The judge asked if she took this man. She said yes without looking at him. The judge asked if he took this woman. He said yes the way he said everything, flat, controlled, like emotion was a language he'd learned but chose not to speak. They signed the certificate. It was done. The whole thing took 11 minutes. Alexei drove them to the residence, a word Nikolai used instead of home, which told her everything she needed to know about how he thought about the place. It sat on a hill outside the city, behind walls high enough to block the view from the road, surrounded by a perimeter of cameras and motion sensors and men who stood at posts with the rigid alertness of people paid to never relax. The house itself was massive but cold. Clean lines, dark stone, glass walls that looked out over nothing. Just trees and fence and sky. It was beautiful the way a hospital is beautiful, designed for function, stripped of warmth. A woman named Irina met them at the door. She was in her 60s, severe-faced, with the efficiency of someone who ran things and didn't need permission. "Your room is upstairs, second floor, east wing," Irina said, addressing Lena without warmth but without hostility. "Mr. Vasov's quarters are in the west wing. Breakfast is at 7. Dinner is at 8. You eat when you want, but those are the times food is prepared." Lena nodded. She carried one suitcase. Everything she owned fit inside it. Her room was large, clean, and empty in the specific way that rooms are empty when they've never held anyone's life. A bed, a desk, curtains drawn against the evening. She sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at her hands. She was married. To a man whose name made prosecutors nervous and whose empire ran through the veins of the city like poison. She had signed a contract that traded her freedom for her father's survival, and now she sat in a stranger's house on a hill, listening to rain hit glass, wondering what she had become. A knock came around 10 that night. Soft, almost tentative. A strange sound in a house built for men who never hesitated. She opened the door. Nikolai stood in the hallway. He had changed into a simple black t-shirt and dark pants, and without the suit, he looked younger, almost human. He held a folded blanket in one hand. "The east wing gets cold at night," he said. "Heating system's old. I've been meaning to fix it." She took the blanket. Their fingers didn't touch. He looked at her for a moment, not the calculating stare from the Elysian Club, but something else, something that moved across his face too quickly to name. "You're safe here," he said. "Whatever you think about me, whatever you've heard. In this house, you're safe." She wanted to ask how she could be safe in the home of a man who ran an empire built on violence, how she could be safe when armed guards patrolled the grounds and cameras watched every door, how the word safe could mean anything in a place where danger was the foundation everything else was built on. But she didn't ask. Because there was something in his voice, buried deep, almost invisible, that sounded like a man who meant it. Not a performance, not a strategy, just a cracked, half-broken sincerity from someone who had probably never been safe himself. "Good night," she said. He nodded, turned, walked down the hallway with steps so quiet they barely registered on the hardwood floor. Lena closed the door, pressed her back against it, slid to the floor, and sat there in the dark, clutching a blanket from a man she didn't know, in a house she didn't choose, wondering if safety and captivity could wear the same face. The first week passed in silence and routine. Lena ate alone. She walked the grounds, always within the walls, always under the distant gaze of security cameras, and tried to understand the geography of her new prison. The garden was surprisingly well kept, with rows of hedges trimmed sharp as blades, and a stone path that wound through clusters of trees she couldn't name. There was a library on the second floor with more books than she expected and fewer locks than she feared. She saw Nikolai twice. Once at dinner, where he ate without speaking, reading something on his phone with a frown that never left his face. Once in the corridor near his office, where he passed her with a nod and nothing else, like she was a tenant he vaguely recognized. On the 8th day, she broke. She found him in his study, a dark room lined with shelves and a desk covered in papers, and 2 phones, neither of which ever stopped buzzing. He looked up when she pushed the door open without knocking. "I can't do this," she said. "Do what?" "This. The silence, the walls, the guards staring at me like I'm something to protect or something to contain, and I can't tell which. I didn't sign up to be a ghost in someone's house." He set down his pen, leaned back. "What do you want?" "I want to know the rules, the real ones, not the contract language. I want to know what I can do, where I can go, what happens when I need to see my father, what happens if I want to leave the grounds, what happens if you can do anything you want." His voice was steady, almost bored. "Go anywhere. See anyone. The car is available. Alexei will drive you, or you can drive yourself. The only thing I ask is that you tell security when you leave so they can ensure you're not followed." "Followed by whom?" He held her gaze. The silence stretched long enough to become an answer. "I have enemies, Lena. That's not a metaphor. There are people who would use you to hurt me. That's the reality of what you signed. So yes, you go where you want, but you let my people know. That's not control. That's keeping you alive. The way he said it, keeping you alive, made her stomach drop. Not because it was dramatic, because it was ordinary. Like he was describing a maintenance task. Change the oil, check the locks, keep the wife alive. Who are these enemies? That's not something you need to know. The hell it isn't. If someone might hurt me, I deserve to know who. He studied her. Something shifted in his posture. A reluctant respect maybe, or just surprise that she pushed back. His name is Victor Sorin, Nikolai said. He ran the Eastern Territories before I consolidated them. He lost everything: money, influence, soldiers. He blames me. He's been rebuilding for 2 years, and his methods have become, he paused, choosing the word carefully, unpredictable. Unpredictable how? A car bomb last month outside one of my warehouses. A lieutenant found dead in his apartment. 3 of my legitimate businesses received anonymous threats. Nikolai's voice didn't waver, but his hand, the one resting on the desk, had curled into a fist so tight the knuckles went white. Victor doesn't fight wars, he poisons wells. He finds what you care about and he destroys it slowly. And now he knows you have a wife. Nikolai said nothing, which was the loudest thing he'd said all week. Lena felt something cold crawl up her spine. Not fear exactly, or not only fear. Understanding. The contract, the marriage, the carefully constructed arrangement. It wasn't just about image. It was a liability. She was a target now, and the moment that marriage certificate became public record, a man she'd never met began planning how to use her. She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. That night, she said, when you brought the blanket, you said I was safe. I meant it. How can you mean it when you just told me someone wants to destroy everything you care about? He looked at her, and for one unguarded second, the mask slipped, and underneath it she saw something raw. Something that looked like a man standing at the edge of something he couldn't control. Because I'll burn this city to the ground before I let anyone touch you. The words hung in the room. Lena walked out without responding. She climbed the stairs to her room, locked the door, and stood at the window watching the tree line beyond the wall. Somewhere out there, a man named Victor Sorin was watching back, and she had no idea how close he already was. She started counting days. Not because she wanted to. It was a reflex, the same compulsive math her brain ran at 3 a.m. when she cataloged debts and interest rates in empty rooms. Day 9. Day 11. Day 14. She scratched them nowhere, kept them only in her head, a private ledger that reminded her this arrangement had an expiration date, 24 months minus however many days she'd already survived. That was how she framed it. Survival. Like a woman stranded on an island, marking the wall with a stick, watching the horizon for a boat that eventually had to come. The house had rhythms she learned without being taught. Nikolai was up before dawn. She could hear him moving through the west wing, the low murmur of phone calls, footsteps on hardwood that were always controlled, always deliberate. Alexei arrived each morning at 6:45 in a black car that idled at the side entrance while they exchanged papers and low words Lena couldn't hear from the second floor. By 7:30, Nikolai was gone. By 8, the house exhaled. She visited her father on day 12. Gerald Hartwell had moved out of the hotel, at Lena's insistence once the debts were cleared, into a care facility 2 miles from the building. The place was clean and well-staffed, the kind of facility that required serious money, and serious money had appeared. Her father didn't ask exactly where it came from. His eyes told her he suspected. His silence told her he'd decided not to know. He was sitting up when she arrived, more alert than he'd been in months. Physical therapy was working. His left hand was regaining grip. His speech came cleaner, fewer words lost in transit between thought and mouth. "You look tired," he said. "I'm fine." "Lena, I know your tired face. I've been looking at it for 26 years. She sat beside his bed and folded her hands in her lap. Outside his window, a tree was losing its last leaves, branches going bare and dark against a white sky. "The hotel's okay. I talked to the manager this morning. Bookings are coming in. The East Wing renovation starts next month." That's not what I asked. Dad! I asked if you were tired. She looked at him. Yes, I'm tired. He was quiet for a moment. His right hand, the steady one, moved and covered hers on the blanket. Tell me about him. There's nothing to tell. Lena. He's private. He's complicated. Complicated. Gerald's mouth twisted around the word. Not cruel, just knowing. The way a man who built a career reading people reads the cracks in his daughter's voice. Is he good to you? She thought about the blanket in the hallway. The way Nikolai had said you're safe, like it cost him something to say it. The door he never opened. The space he kept between them like a wall he'd built so long ago he'd forgotten it was there. He doesn't hurt me, she said, which wasn't the same thing, but it was all she had. Her father's hand tightened on hers. If that ever changes, it won't. If it does, it won't, Dad. She squeezed back. Rest. I'll come Thursday. She left before he could ask anything else. Alexei was waiting in the car. The drive back was 40 minutes through rain-slicked streets, and she spent it watching the city slide past the window. The storefronts and the traffic and the ordinary people moving through ordinary lives, and feeling the distance between herself and all of it widen like a crack in ice. The problem with learning someone's rhythms is that you start to notice when they break. On day 17, Nikolai came home at 3 in the afternoon. That had never happened. He moved through the front door fast, jacket off before he hit the entry hall, tie already loose, and there was something about his posture, a compression, a held tension, that made the air in the room change. Lena was in the library. She heard him through the ceiling, pacing in the study directly above. Back and forth, the creak of the floorboards marking each circuit like a metronome winding too tight. Then voices. Loud enough to feel through the floor, even if she couldn't make out words. Alexei's and another man's. Lower, rougher, an argument. The kind where both people have already passed the point of changing each other's minds and are just trying to survive the conversation. It stopped abruptly. Then silence. 15 minutes later, Alexei knocked on the library door. Mr. Vasov would like to speak with you at dinner. She looked up from the book she hadn't been reading. He would like to, or he's telling me to. Alexei's face did the thing it always did. A controlled neutral that contained, she was beginning to understand, a considerable amount of dry humor. In my experience with Mr. Vasov, the distinction is sometimes academic. Dinner was the first time they'd shared a table since the second night in the house. Irina had set the long dining table with unnecessary formality, 2 place settings at opposite ends of a table built for 14 candles. Lena suspected nobody had lit in a long time. The candles felt like a miscommunication. She sat at one end and waited. Nikolai arrived and stopped at the doorway when he saw the table. He looked at the candles for exactly 1 second, then sat down without commenting. He poured water for both of them. That small gesture, automatic, thoughtless, surprised her enough that she almost said something. Someone broke into one of my warehouses last night, he said. No preamble, no adjustment period. Nothing was taken. Cameras were disabled, but the lock on the back entrance, it was picked by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Victor's people have done that kind of work before. Why are you telling me this? Because it's the second escalation in a week. A tail was spotted on Alexei's car Tuesday. It was clean, professional. Victor isn't testing us anymore. He's measuring. Lena set down her fork. Measuring what? Routes, schedules, patterns, when we leave, when we return, who comes and goes. He looked at her directly. Your visit to your father today. We picked up a vehicle. It stayed 2 blocks back the whole time. It didn't follow you inside. Her mouth went dry. You think he's watching my father? I think Victor is cataloging everything I might protect. His voice stayed level, but the muscle along his jaw was working, tightening. And your father is on that list now. You told me I could see him whenever I wanted. I'm not stopping you. I'm telling you the reality. The reality is that I married you, and now my father has a tail on him. That's the reality. Yes. The word landed blunt and without cushion. No apology in it, no softening. just the flat acknowledgement of a man who dealt in consequences and had run out of ways to make them sound like anything else. If something happens to him, she started. Nothing will happen to him. You don't know that. I've placed 2 men outside the facility. He doesn't know they're there, but they are. He's covered. Lena stared at him. The anger was there. It had been building since the car, since Alexei's careful words, since the image of a vehicle 2 blocks back watching her walk into her father's care facility. But underneath the anger was something she hated more. Relief. Specific, unwanted, complicated relief that somebody had already thought of this, that she hadn't had to ask. She hated that she was relieved. This wasn't the deal, she said. The deal was 2 years of public appearances. Not this. No, it wasn't. I didn't sign up to have my family used as leverage against you. I know. So fix it. He looked at her across the length of that absurd table, with the pointless candles burning between them, and for a moment his face showed something that wasn't quite helpless. Nikolai Vasov didn't do helpless, but was adjacent to it. The face of a man who knows exactly how much he can control and has just hit the border of it. Victor doesn't negotiate, he said. He doesn't accept settlements. He doesn't back down when warned. I've tried every channel that doesn't end with someone dead, and every channel has closed. What's coming is coming, and the only thing I can do is make sure you and everyone connected to you are standing when it ends. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have. She pushed back from the table, left her plate half finished, and walked out. She didn't sleep that night. Lay on her back staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around her. The hum of the heating system, the distant click of security cameras rotating, the wind moving through the trees outside the wall. She thought about Victor Sorin, a name she'd heard once and immediately began to understand as the shape of something large and patient and focused, the kind of danger that didn't announce itself, the kind that assembled quietly while you were watching somewhere else. At 2 a.m, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs. The kitchen was empty and lit only by the light above the stove. She was standing at the counter with a glass of water when she heard footsteps in the hall. Not careful footsteps. She'd heard his careful footsteps. The ones he used when the house was awake and he was moving through it like a man trained to take up no space. These were heavier. Tired. Nikolai came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw her. They looked at each other across the dark room. He was in a gray shirt, sleeves down for once, and he looked exhausted in a way his daytime face never showed. The skin beneath his eyes darker, the line of his mouth looser, like the expression he wore during business hours required muscle effort he'd finally let go. He moved to the cabinet, pulled out a glass, filled it at the sink, stood at the counter across from her. They were maybe 6 feet apart. The kitchen felt smaller than it was. You don't sleep, she said. Not much. How long? He considered. Years. She turned her glass in her hands. Is it the business? Partly. What's the other part? He drank, set the glass down. His eyes moved to the window above the sink, to the dark that pressed against the glass. When I was 11, I spent 3 months in a place where sleep was a liability. You slept. Someone took what you had. You learned to rest light or not at all. He said it without drama, the way you describe a habit, like explaining why you preferred a certain brand of coffee. Lena didn't speak for a moment. What kind of place? The kind that shouldn't exist for children. He turned from the window. I don't say this for sympathy. I say it so you understand why certain things are wired the way they are. Why are you telling me at all? He seemed to consider this genuinely, not deflecting, actually turning the question over. Because you're going to be living with the consequences of how I'm wired for the next 23 months. Seems fair. She almost laughed. Not at him. At the strangeness of it. The two of them standing in a kitchen at 2 a.m. in a house full of guards, talking about sleep and childhood and fairness like it was ordinary. My mother used to sit in the kitchen at night, she said. When she couldn't sleep, I'd find her there sometimes with tea she wasn't drinking, just sitting. She paused. She said the kitchen was the only room in a house that was honest. Nikolai looked at her. Honest how? Everything else, the living room, the bedroom, those are rooms you perform in. But in the kitchen, you're just... She stopped. I don't know. Hungry, maybe. A quiet settled over them. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. Something in between, something new. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow will be harder. She went upstairs. She still didn't sleep for a long time, but something had shifted, small and almost imperceptible, like a door that had been closed from the inside for a long time being opened a single inch. She was still measuring that inch when everything broke. It started on day 23 with a phone call Nikolai took in the driveway at 7 in the morning. Lena saw him from her window, saw the way he listened, the way his chin dropped a fraction, the way his hand went to the back of his neck in a gesture she'd identified as his tell for news he couldn't control. He stood there for 40 seconds after the call ended, just stood in the rain with the phone at his side, before he turned and went back inside. By noon, 4 additional cars had arrived at the house, men she hadn't seen before. Alexei moved through the corridors with a clipped efficiency that made the normal guards look relaxed. Irina was told to stay in the East Wing kitchen. Lena was told, not asked, to stay off the main floor. She stayed off the main floor for approximately 40 minutes. Then she walked downstairs. 3 men she didn't know were in the entry hall. One of them put a hand out without thinking, a gesture meant to stop her. And she looked at the hand and then at him with a precision that made him slowly retract it. She found Alexei in the corridor outside the study. What happened? You should be upstairs, Mrs. Vasov. Alexei. It's a precaution. What happened? He looked at her for a moment with those careful, measuring eyes. Then, one of our men was found this morning near the Eastern Bridge. He's alive, but critically. Someone wanted him found. It was a message. A message saying what? That Victor can reach inside. Alexei held her gaze. Specifically, it was Nikolai's driver. The man who drove you to see your father 12 days ago. The cold moved through her so fast she felt it in her back teeth. Victor was watching that day, she said. We believe so. He saw who I am. He saw the route. He saw... Yes. She turned and pushed through the study door. Nikolai was at his desk, 2 phones and a laptop open, 3 men standing against the wall she didn't know. He looked up when she came in, and the look on his face when he saw her, not surprise, something more controlled, more complicated, told her he'd been expecting this. Get out, she said to the room. Nobody moved. The 3 men looked at Nikolai. He said, Give us a moment. They filed out. The door clicked shut. Dmitri was your driver, Lena said. He drove me to my father. Victor found him. Lena, did Victor see the facility? Does he know exactly where my father is? Nikolai stood. He didn't come around the desk. We're increasing security at the facility now. Your father is... Does he know where my father is? The pause was less than a second, but she caught it. We have to assume yes. She crossed the room in 4 steps and hit the desk with both palms hard enough to make the phones jump. Nikolai didn't flinch. He stood his ground and held her gaze with the level steadiness of a man who had absorbed a great deal of impact in his life. You told me he was safe, she said. Her voice shook. Not from weakness, from the effort of keeping it below a scream. You told me your men were outside the facility. You told me, I meant every word. Your driver is in the hospital and your enemy knows where my father sleeps. And right now there are 6 of my best people at that facility, and your father does not know what's happening and he is safe. At this moment, he is safe. At this moment, the words came out like razors. That's what you're giving me, at this moment. That's all anyone can give you. He said it quietly, not defensive, not apologetic, just honest, the specific, stripped-down honesty of someone who has lived long enough to know that assurances are lies and the only real thing you can offer is the present. She stepped back, pressed her hands over her face, breathed. Victor Soren hadn't been a name to her 10 days ago. Now he was the shape of everything she was afraid of. He was the car 2 blocks back, and the man in the hospital, and the knowledge of a care facility on a residential street where her father sat in his wheelchair, not knowing that a war was being arranged around him. A war that started before she even signed her name to a contract. A war that had been aimed at her and everyone she loved, possibly before she knew Nikolai Vasov existed. She lowered her hands. I want to know everything. Not summaries. Not what you think I can handle. Everything about Victor. Everything about what happened before you married me. If I'm in this, I need to know what I'm in." Nikolai looked at her for a long moment. She watched him weigh it, saw the exact calculation moving behind his eyes, the cost analysis, the risk assessment, the old habit of keeping information contained. And then he made a decision. "Sit down," he said. "This is going to take a while." She sat. And Nikolai Vasov began to tell her the truth. He told her about Victor and the Eastern Territories, about the consolidation 3 years ago that had absorbed Victor's operation through a combination of leverage and force that Nikolai described without euphemism or apology, about the dozen men who'd switched loyalties, the accounts that froze, the supply lines that rerouted, about the moment Victor lost everything, sitting across a table from Nikolai in a room Nikolai declined to describe in detail, and the specific thing Victor had said before he walked out. "You'll watch everything you build turn to ash, and when it does, I'll make sure you're still breathing, so you have time to understand why." "He's not rebuilding to take power," Nikolai said. "He doesn't want territory. He wants to watch me lose. That's the whole objective." Lena stared at him. "The financial collapse, my father's debts, the investors who betrayed him." Nikolai's expression shifted. She felt it before she understood it, the cold certainty of a pattern snapping into focus. "The people who destroyed my father's business, the investors who disappeared with his money, were they connected to Victor?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. "Nikolai, we're still verifying that. Were they connected to Victor?" He looked at her, and in the most controlled face she had ever watched, something broke open, just briefly, just enough. "Yes," he said. "We believe so." The room tilted. Not physically. Everything stayed where it was, the desk and the phones and the man behind them. But inside her chest, something shifted with a violence that took her breath. Her father's stroke, the hotel, the foreclosure documents on the counter at midnight, the phone call from the man with the polished voice who wasn't sorry, the contract she signed in a department store dress at a courthouse while a board clerk watched. All of it, every piece of her desperation, every impossible choice, every day she had watched her father diminish. It hadn't just happened. It had been arranged. Victor Sorin had needed a lever against Nikolai, and he had found one that didn't yet exist and built it from the ground up. He had destroyed her family specifically so that she would be desperate enough to accept a marriage contract to a man he wanted to destroy. He had put her here. She stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she stood. "You knew," she said. "I suspected. After you what? After you offered me the contract? After I signed it? After you moved me into your house and put my father under surveillance and let me think I had made a choice?" "You did make a choice. You let me make it without telling me I was already a pawn in someone else's game." Nikolai came around the desk. She stepped back. He stopped. His hands came up, not reaching, just visible, open, the way you show someone you're not holding a weapon. "I didn't know the full scope when I made the offer," he said. "I knew Victor was escalating. I knew a contract marriage would stabilize my public position. I didn't know—" He stopped. "I didn't know the connection to your family went back that far. But you found out." "Recently? Yes." "How recently?" Another pause, smaller, but she caught it the same way she caught the first one. "Alexei brought me the preliminary connections 2 weeks ago," he said. 2 weeks ago. Day 3 of her living in his house. 2 weeks he had known, or suspected, and said nothing. 2 weeks of kitchen conversations and blankets in hallways and "you're safe here," while he sat on the knowledge that her entire catastrophe had been constructed by the same man now hunting them both. She walked past him to the door. "Lena, don't." She stopped with her hand on the doorframe, didn't turn around. "Don't say anything right now. I need to not be in this room." She walked out, down the corridor, past the new guards and their carefully neutral faces, up the stairs to her room, where she locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed with her hands clenched in her lap and stared at the wall. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. She let it buzz twice more, then answered. Silence on the line. Then, very softly, a voice she'd never heard. "Mrs. Vasov, welcome to the game. I wanted to personally introduce myself since I'm the one who brought you." The voice was unhurried, cultured almost. The kind of voice that had learned to perform civility so thoroughly it had forgotten what it was covering. Victor Sorin spoke the way a man speaks when he has spent years deciding he is the smartest person in any room he enters. "I'd hang up," he continued, "but I think you want to hear what I have to say. And I think, given what you just learned in that study, you're not entirely certain whose side you're on anymore." Lena's hand tightened on the phone until her knuckles ached. She did not hang up. "Good," Victor said. "That tells me something. It tells you I want to know who I'm dealing with. Smart. Nikolai always surrounds himself with capable people. It's his one consistent virtue." A pause, comfortable and deliberate. "Your father's name is Gerald. He had a stroke in April and a second one in August. He's in the Meridian Care Facility on Caldwell Street, room 14, East Corridor. He prefers the window that faces the garden, even though the garden is mostly dead this time of year. Habit, I suppose." Her stomach dropped through the floor. "If you're trying to scare me, I'm not trying anything. I'm demonstrating. There's a difference. Trying implies uncertainty about the outcome." Another pause. "I want you to understand your actual position, Mrs. Vasov, not the position Nikolai described to you, which I imagine was something along the lines of, 'You're safe here and I'll protect you and trust me.' I want you to understand the position as it actually exists." "Say what you came to say." "I came to offer you a way out." His voice warmed slightly, the way a salesman's does when he gets to the part he's rehearsed. "Leave. Tonight. Take your father, go somewhere Nikolai doesn't know about, and stay there. I have no interest in you or your family if you're not in that house. You're leverage. Remove yourself from the equation, and you become irrelevant to me. I have no desire to hurt innocent people. You destroyed my family to use me as a tool against him." "Yes," he said, without any hesitation at all. "I did. And I'm telling you that now, so you understand I'm being honest with you, which is more than your husband has been." She stood up, walked to the window. Outside the glass, the evening had turned the grounds gray and flat, the tree line a dark mass against a darker sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the wall, in a vehicle she couldn't see, someone was watching this window. "If I leave," she said slowly, "he loses his stability, his public image, whatever protection a wife provides him in terms of how his enemies perceive him, among other things. And then you move. And then the situation resolves itself." Victor's voice stayed smooth. "You're a civilian. You signed a contract under economic duress. No court in this country would hold you to it, and more importantly, I don't hold you to it. Walk away, Lena. Take the old man and walk away." She stared at the window, at her own reflection in the dark glass, thin, hollowed, eyes that had been running calculations since April and hadn't stopped. "I'll think about it," she said. "Don't think too long." The warmth left his voice. What remained was precise and cold. "Things are going to begin moving quickly now. I'd hate for you to still be in that house when they do." The line went dead. She stood holding the phone for a long time, long enough that the screen went dark, long enough that a knock came at her door. One of the new guards, checking, and she said she was fine in a voice that came out steadier than she deserved. Then she went back downstairs. Nikolai was still in the study. He was alone now, standing at the window with his back to the door, hands in his pockets, and the posture of a man who had sent everyone away so he could be wherever he actually was without an audience. She recognized it because she had the same reflex. Perform the control, then find a room to stop. "Victor just called me," she said. He turned. The composure snapped back in place immediately, but she'd seen what was underneath it in the half-second before. Something tight and worn and braced. "He called your cell." "Unknown number. He knew my father's room number. He described the window my father sits near." Nikolai crossed the room in 6 steps and took the phone from her hand. She let him. He looked at the call log, then set the phone on the desk and pressed his knuckles against the surface and stood very still. What did he offer? He said leave. Take my father and disappear. He said you'd lose your stability and he'd leave us alone. And I told him I'd think about it. Nikolai looked up. His eyes moved over her face with an attention that felt physical, like a hand tracing features, looking for the answer before she gave it. "Are you thinking about it?" he said. "I'm thinking about the fact that you knew Victor built the trap that caught my family, and you sat across from me at dinner with candles on the table and said nothing." Her voice didn't shake this time. It had moved past shaking into something more dangerous. Clarity. "I'm thinking about whether the man offering me an exit is worse than the man who didn't tell me I was already inside one." "Victor is worse," Nikolai said, categorically. "Whatever he told you about leaving quietly and walking away, he doesn't leave witnesses to this kind of planning. If you leave this house, you become a loose end. Not immediately, maybe not for months, but eventually." "That's what you'd say." "Yes, because it's true. And because I know Victor in ways you don't. You knew things about my family that I didn't, and you made choices about what to tell me. So forgive me if your version of events doesn't arrive with a guarantee attached. The silence between them was different from all the previous silences. Not the careful distance of strangers managing an arrangement. Something rawer. Something that happened when two people had run out of the courtesy they used to pad the truth." "I made a mistake," Nikolai said. "Not the offer, not the contract. Waiting to tell you what I found out about Victor's connection to your family. That was a mistake." "Why did you wait?" He didn't answer immediately. The pause lasted long enough to confirm what she already half knew, that the answer cost him something. "Because telling you would have meant explaining that I knew your circumstances before I made the offer," he said. "That I knew exactly how desperate you were and exactly why. And I didn't want you to look at me the way you're looking at me right now." She absorbed that, held it. "That's honest," she said finally. "I told you the kitchen was the only room I was honest in. Turns out, I was wrong about the geography." She almost let something soften. Then her phone, sitting on his desk, lit up with a text from an unknown number. 3 words. "Clock is running." Nikolai looked at the screen, his jaw set. "He's watching the house," she said. "He's been watching the house. Can you stop him? I'm working on it. That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." He picked up one of his own phones. "I need to make calls. Alexei will—" "I don't want Alexei. I want to know what you're going to do." He stopped, turned back, and for a moment Nikolai Vasov looked at her not as a variable in a security equation or a piece of an arrangement or a liability to be managed, but as someone he owed a straight answer. "I'm going to find the access point," he said. "Victor has someone inside. The call to your phone, the information about your father's room, that's not surveillance alone. That's someone feeding him from inside my network. I find that person, I close the breach, and then I move on Victor directly." "You have a traitor." "I have a traitor," he confirmed, and the word came out flat and furious, a sound like something tearing. She left him to his calls, went to the kitchen because it was the only room in the house that felt like it belonged to some version of normal life. Irina was gone. The lights were low. She stood at the counter and pressed her forehead against the cabinet above it, and breathed. Victor's voice was still in her ear. The unhurried cadence of a man who had been planning this for years and was now watching the final pieces arrange themselves exactly where he'd always intended them to be. He had destroyed her father's life to create her desperation. He had manufactured her need for a savior and then placed Nikolai in her path. Every step she'd taken, every door that closed, every option that disappeared, every desperate choice, had been a step along a corridor Victor built and lit, and left a sign at the end of pointing toward Nikolai Vasov's contract. She had thought she was choosing. She had thought signing that paper in a courthouse was the worst choice available and still a choice. It wasn't. It was the only door in a hallway with no other exits, and somebody had constructed that hallway specifically for her. The rage came up hot and blinding, and she stood in the kitchen and let it move through her because there was nowhere else for it to go. The traitor's name was Marcus Vale. Alexei brought the news at 7 the next morning, and the way he knocked on the study door, 3 raps, harder than his usual precise double knock, told Lena before he spoke that whatever he was carrying had weight. She was in the library when she heard it. The voices that followed were low and controlled with the specific control of men trying not to be heard, which meant she went downstairs. Marcus Vale had been with Nikolai for 4 years. He ran logistics. Vehicles, routes, safe houses, the infrastructure of movement that kept the organization operational. He was 38, had a wife and 2 kids in the suburbs, attended every holiday gathering, was known for a specific dry sense of humor that Alexei had once described as the only thing that made certain meetings bearable. He had been Nikolai's man for 4 years. He had been Victor's for 2. Alexei laid it out in the study with Nikolai standing at the desk and Lena standing near the door where nobody had asked her to be, but nobody had moved to exclude her either. The evidence was technical. Phone records pulled through channels Alexei declined to specify, a pattern of location data, 2 transfers of money to an account structured to look like contractor payments. The account traced back through 4 layers of shell companies to a holding entity Victor had used before and apparently trusted enough to use again. Dmitri's route on day 12, Alexei said. Marcus coordinated the vehicle schedule that morning. He would have known exactly which car was used, which route was cleared. He gave Victor my driver, Nikolai said. It came out very quiet. He gave Victor the route. The tail was Victor's crew. And the call to her phone. Nikolai didn't look at Lena when he said it. Her number was in the household directory. Marcus had access. Yes. The silence that followed had a quality she hadn't encountered in the house before. Not the silence of people managing their reactions. The silence of people who had reached the edge of managing anything. Where is he now? Nikolai said. We found him 40 minutes ago. Alexei paused. He'd already run. His house is empty. Wife and children are gone. He moved them 3 days ago. Told the school a family emergency. He knew we'd find it. He knew we'd find it eventually. He bought time. Nikolai's hand came down on the desk. Not a slam. A slow, controlled press, like he was holding himself to the surface by the palm. Victor knew we'd find it. Marcus was never meant to stay hidden. He was meant to be found after he'd already done the damage. He looked up, and the expression on his face was the first genuinely unguarded thing Lena had seen from him. Not grief exactly, not rage exactly, but the specific exhaustion of a man who understands he has been outmaneuvered. This was the operation, not the breach. The breach was the message. Victor wanted me to know he was already inside, already 6 moves ahead, already looking at you right now, Lena said. Both men turned. She hadn't planned to speak. The words arrived on their own with the cold clarity of something obvious that everyone in the room was too close to the problem to see. The call to my phone. The message. Letting Marcus be found. She stepped fully into the room. He's not hiding. He's showing you his hand deliberately. He wants you to know how deep he got, how long ago, how many steps ahead he planned. He's not threatening you. He's demoralizing you. Nikolai looked at her. He wants you second-guessing every person in your network, she continued. Every loyal person now looks like a potential Marcus. Every operation has a potential breach. You spend the next 2 weeks auditing everything, trusting no one, running in circles while he positions. She paused. And while you're doing that, he moves. The room was very quiet. She's right, Alexei said. Nikolai was still looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Something layered, something recalibrating. So we don't spend 2 weeks auditing, he said slowly. We compress, Alexei said. 24 hours, core team only. Everything else goes dark. And what does he do in the 24 hours where we're dark? He moves first, Lena said. Which means you know where he's going to be. The look Nikolai gave her then was entirely different from any he'd given her before. Not the measuring stare from the Elysian Club, not the controlled consideration from the kitchen. This one was something that sat in the chest, uncomfortable and specific. The look of a man who has been alone at the center of something dangerous for a very long time and has just, without planning it, stopped being alone. Get Petrov and Crane, Nikolai said to Alexei. Nobody else. Nobody who's been through Marcus's logistics chain in the last 6 months. He looked at Lena. You stay on the 2nd floor. Absolutely not. Lena, you have a traitor who's gone and an enemy who's making moves, and you have approximately 1 day before whatever Victor has planned starts moving. Keeping me on the 2nd floor doesn't protect me. It just keeps me from being useful. You're not equipped for... I identified his strategy in 30 seconds, and neither of you had framed it that way yet. She held his gaze. I'm not going upstairs. Something moved across his face. Not surrender. Nikolai Vasov didn't surrender. Something more like acknowledgement. The specific, slightly bewildered acknowledgement of a man realizing that the person he thought he was protecting has turned around and is now protecting him back. Stay with Alexei, he said finally. You don't leave the room we're working in. You don't touch anything without telling me first. Fine. And if I tell you to move, you move immediately. No argument. One argument, then I move. His mouth tightened. Somewhere in the tension, something that was almost a different thing, almost dark humor, flickered and disappeared. Fine. They worked through the night. The core team was 6 people, including Alexei, 2 men named Petrov and Crane, who moved and spoke with the compressed efficiency of people who had done dangerous things in small rooms before, and Nikolai, who ran the operation from the study table that had been cleared of everything except laptops and phones and a city map that had been spread flat and waited at the corners with whatever was close. Lena sat at the far end of the table and watched and listened and learned more about how the world actually worked in 6 hours than she had in 26 years. Victor's likely positions were narrowed down from the map. Properties he'd owned before the consolidation, properties owned by associates, properties that surveillance had flagged in the past 8 months. Crane eliminated 6 based on infrastructure. No power, no access, too visible. Petrov eliminated 3 based on crew behavior patterns he tracked through contacts Lena didn't ask about. That left 4 sites. He won't be at all 4, Nikolai said. He'll be at 1, and he'll want us to split resources covering the others. So we don't split, Alexei said. We cover 1. If we pick wrong, we won't pick wrong. Nikolai's finger landed on the map. A location at the edge of the port district. A logistics facility that had been seized from Victor's operation 3 years ago and was currently operating under new management that Crane confirmed was paper thin. He started there. He'll want to end there. That's how he thinks. Lena looked at the map, at the location, at the roads feeding into it, the water on one side, the industrial sprawl on the other. He wants you to come to him, she said. Yes. He's ready for you there. Yes. So going there is what he's been waiting for. Nikolai looked at her. Also yes. Then why? Because sometimes the only move is the one your enemy is waiting for, and the question is who survives the waiting. His voice was even. His eyes were not. I've been in the position Victor is in. I know what it costs. He's been rebuilding for 3 years on nothing but the intention of destroying me. That kind of effort, that long, that focused, it hollows a man out. He's not strategic anymore. He's obsessive. An obsession makes you predictable in ways that strategy doesn't. You're going to use his certainty against him. I'm going to make him so certain I'm walking into his trap that he stops looking for the one I'm building around it. She absorbed this, looked at the map, looked at the 4 men around the table who were running on caffeine and controlled adrenaline, planning the dismantlement of something violent and patient and deeply personal. Then her phone lit up on the edge of the table. Not a call. A photograph. The image loaded slowly, and for a moment she couldn't understand what she was seeing. An interior space, low light, the corner of a room with institutional flooring. Then her eyes found the specific details. A wheelchair. A blanket she recognized, the gray, textured, the one she'd brought herself 2 weeks ago. A window with a dead garden beyond it. And her father, asleep in his chair, photographed from close enough that the photographer had been in the room with him. The care facility. Room 14. Past the 6 guards Nikolai had posted outside. Her hands were completely steady when she put the phone on the map, photograph facing up, and said, Victor is already inside. Every head at the table turned. Nikolai looked at the photo. Something went through his face that was beyond expression, a full-body response, contained and invisible to anyone who wasn't watching for it, which she was. His eyes came up to hers, and in them was the first thing she had ever seen in Nikolai Vasov that looked like fear. Not for himself. He moved while we were planning, she said. Her voice came out very quiet. All of this, the map, the sights, the compression, he knew. He knew we'd do exactly this, and he moved while we had our heads down. Nobody spoke. "He has my father," she said, "and he's waiting for me to call." The phone lit up again. This time it rang. Unknown number, the same one as before. Everyone in the room looked at Lena Hartwell. She looked at Nikolai, and something that had been building since the courthouse, since the blanket in the hallway, since the kitchen at 2 a.m, something she had been refusing to name and refusing to feel and refusing to allow herself because it was inconvenient and terrifying and had no place in a contract, came up through her chest like a tide. She picked up the phone. "What do you want?" she said. Victor's voice was the warmest she'd heard it, the voice of a man who had just watched everything fall into place. Victor finished. "How does it feel watching a plan complete itself?" Lena didn't answer immediately. She was looking at Nikolai across the table, and he was looking back at her, and in the 4 seconds of silence between Victor's question and her response, something passed between them that had no language yet. Just the compressed understanding of two people who have run out of time to be careful. "What do you want?" she said again. "I want Nikolai. In person. At the port facility on Harker Street within the hour. Alone." Victor paused. "Your father is comfortable. He's sleeping. He doesn't know where he is yet. I'd like to keep it that way. A man in his condition, that kind of shock, it wouldn't be good for him. If you hurt him, I won't hurt him. He's irrelevant to me. He's a mechanism. The moment Nikolai walks through that door, your father goes home. That's the trade. And Nikolai, that's between him and me." The warmth in Victor's voice had cooled to something precise and final. "You have 50 minutes. After that, I start making your father's situation less comfortable." The call ended. Lena set the phone down. Her hand was steady. She didn't know how. Nikolai was already moving. He had his jacket from the chair back and was reaching for it when she said, "You're not going alone." The call said, "The call was Victor telling you what he wants, which is exactly what you told me about him 20 minutes ago. He's obsessive. He's predictable. He's been holding this moment in his head for 3 years." She moved around the table and stood in front of him. "If you walk in there alone, you walk in there dead. If I don't walk in, we get my father out first." Nikolai looked at her. "Victor has people inside the facility." "How many?" He glanced at Alexei, who was already on a phone, already pulling information from whatever network of contacts existed in the parts of the city that didn't have names. Alexei held up 2 fingers without interrupting his call. "2 inside," Nikolai said. "At minimum." "Your 6 men are outside." "My 6 men don't know there's a threat inside. They're watching the perimeter." "So tell them." She held his gaze. "Right now. Call them. Get my father out of that room before Victor knows we've moved." She glanced at the map still spread on the table. "Victor is at Harker Street waiting for you. He can't be at the facility at the same time. His people inside are holding position until he gives an order. If we move in the next 10 minutes, he'll know we moved. He'll know after." "Which is too late for him," Petrov spoke from across the table. "She's right on the timing. Victor runs a chain of command. His people inside won't act without authorization. They're positioned to threaten, not to move independently." Nikolai looked at Lena for a second longer than he needed to. Then he took his phone and made the call. The next 8 minutes were the longest of her life. She stood at the window of the study while Nikolai coordinated through the phone. In low, rapid exchanges she caught fragments of. "East Corridor, Room 14, do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Extract and transport. Confirmation required." Alexei ran parallel communication with Crane and Petrov, who were already pulling on equipment with the focused quiet of people who had done this before and understood that speed and silence were the same thing at moments like this. The confirmation came at minute 7. Her father was out. The 2 men Victor had placed inside the facility, orderlies, both of them, hired in the last month by management that Crane confirmed was now in custody, had been detained without incident. Gerald Hartwell was in a car heading to a location Nikolai declined to specify aloud. Lena pressed her forehead against the cold glass and exhaled once, hard, and then straightened. "He's safe," Nikolai said from behind her. His voice was different. The operational clipping was still there, but underneath it something human had slipped through. My people have him. She turned around. Good. Now we go to Harker Street. No. Nikolai, this is not an argument I'm having with you. Victor's facility is a kill box. He has people positioned, entrances covered, the whole site mapped for one purpose. You walk in there and you don't walk out. You walk in alone and you definitely don't walk out. I won't be alone. He said what he wanted me to hear. I've been doing this longer than you've been watching. He stepped toward her, and the proximity was different from any before. Not managed distance, not careful space, but the close, honest nearness of two people who have dropped the maintenance of their arrangement. I have a plan. You've already helped build it, even if you don't know it yet. She searched his face. Tell me. Victor wants me to walk through the front entrance at Harker Street, which means the front entrance is where his strength is concentrated. He turned to the map. His finger moved to the waterside edge of the facility. The port side has one entrance used for loading. Victor's crew knows it, but it's harder to hold. Water on one side, no cover. He'll have lighter presence there because he doesn't expect me to use it. He expects me to come through the front like a man who got the call and made the obvious move. So you go through the water entrance. Petrov and Crane go through the water entrance 20 minutes before I arrive at the front. By the time Victor's people confirm I'm coming through the main gate, Petrov and Crane are already inside. He looked up. Victor thinks he's set the stage. I let him think that until it's too late to reset it. And if his people at the front move before Petrov and Crane are in position, then we adapt. That's not a plan. That's a prayer. It's the best plan available in 40 minutes with the information we have. His voice didn't waver, but his eyes, she had learned his eyes better than she intended to, showed the calculation underneath, the acknowledgement that this was incomplete and dangerous, and the only option with any probability of working. I need you to stay here. No. Lena. He said her name differently than he had before, not a tool for getting her attention, something deliberate, personal. If something goes wrong in there, if I don't walk out, I need someone outside who knows everything. Someone who can go to the federal contacts I'm going to give to Alexei and hand them everything we have on Victor's organization. Someone who keeps your father safe and makes sure this isn't just... He stopped. Just what? Just two people who died for nothing in a shipping facility on a Tuesday night. His jaw tightened. I need you outside. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough to feel everything she hadn't named, turning over in her chest like something that had been locked in a small space for too long, and was starting to understand the dimensions of its own confinement. Come back, she said. It came out flat, almost aggressive, like a command rather than a plea, which was the only way she knew how to say it. That's the condition. You come back. Something moved across his face, something brief and undefended. Yeah, he said. Okay. They left the house at 11:47. 3 cars, Nikolai and Alexei in the lead vehicle, Petrov and Crane in the second, Lena and one of the remaining guards in the third. The city was wet and empty, in the way cities get at midnight in November, streets reflecting headlights in long smears of yellow and red, the kind of night that makes everything feel provisional. Lena's car stopped 6 blocks from Harker Street, behind a closed loading company whose parking lot was dark and angled away from line of sight. She sat in the back and watched the 2 vehicles in front of her continue on and disappear around the corner of a building that had once been a cannery and now sat derelict and enormous against the port skyline. The guard in the front seat, a man named Tolly, who had said exactly 4 words to her in total, kept his eyes on the street. A radio on the console stayed live but quiet, static underneath the silence. She counted her own heartbeats. It was the only clock she had. Inside the Harker Street facility, the world was steel and shadow and the smell of salt water and rust. Nikolai came through the main gate at 12:04, exactly as Victor's timeline required. The gate was open. The lights were on inside. Not bright, the industrial overhead kind, yellow and flat and harsh. 2 men met him at the entrance, armed. Neither made eye contact. One ran a scanner over him, found the earpiece Nikolai had left in the car, found nothing else. They didn't find the backup Alexei had placed because it was somewhere they hadn't thought to look. They walked him inside. The facility was 3 stories of catwalks and support columns, and the skeletal remains of loading equipment, steel containers stacked along the walls, the floor a rough concrete that amplified every footstep into something that sounded like a threat. Victor had positioned men on the upper catwalks. Nikolai counted 4 before they rounded a column and he stopped counting. Enough. Victor had brought enough. Victor was at the center of the ground floor. He was smaller than Nikolai remembered. The years had compressed him somehow, not physically. He was still broad, still carried himself with the forced ease of a man performing authority, but in the way that consuming a single purpose for 3 years compresses everything that isn't the purpose. He looked like a version of himself that had been reduced, refined, boiled down to the single element of wanting. He wore a dark coat. His hands were loose at his sides. He looked at Nikolai with the expression of a man arriving at the last page of a book he'd spent years writing. "You came," Victor said. "You have something of mine." Nikolai's voice came out level and empty. "The old man." "Already gone. My people at the facility should have checked in by now." Victor glanced at the phone in his hand. Nothing on the screen. His expression shifted. Not alarm yet, just a tightening. He seemed to understand the message. Medical conditions have a way of clarifying priorities. "He's out." Nikolai watched Victor's face. 40 minutes ago." The tightening deepened. "Your inside people are detained. The facility is clear." Nikolai held Victor's gaze across the dirty concrete. "Whatever you were holding over me, you're not holding it anymore." Victor was quiet for 3 seconds. 3 full seconds of a man recalculating at speed. Then something in his face settled. Not defeat, something colder. Resolution. "You move faster than I gave you credit for," Victor said. "You had help." "I had help," Nikolai agreed. "The wife." Victor tilted his head. Something almost like appreciation moved through his expression, ugly and genuine. "I underestimated her." "Yes, you did." "It doesn't change anything. You're still here. In my building, with my people on the catwalks and 4 more behind you that you haven't spotted yet." Victor spread his hands, the gesture of a man showing the whole board. "The old man walking free is a setback. The rest of the game remains." And in the earpiece that Victor's man hadn't found, a voice said, "We're in." Petrov. Water entrance. Inside. Nikolai kept his expression exactly where it was. "You told me once you didn't want power. You wanted to watch me lose." "I wanted you to understand loss," Victor said. "Power is just the instrument. You ruined a man's life, destroyed his business, used his daughter as a tool, spent 3 years and more money than I can calculate building a mechanism to collapse around me." Nikolai took 1 step forward. "What does that cost, Victor? What does running on nothing but revenge for 3 years do to a person?" Victor's jaw hardened. "It gets the job done." "You look exhausted." Nikolai kept his voice quiet. Conversational. Every instinct in the building focused on watching the catwalks without looking at them. "You look like a man who's been holding one breath for 1,000 days. I look like a man who's about to finish something." "Yeah." Nikolai's hand didn't move. His weight didn't shift. "So do I." The first sound came from the east side. A scuffle, brief and violent, terminating in silence. One of Victor's catwalk men turned, which meant his eyes went the wrong direction for 2 seconds. The second sound was closer. Victor heard it. His eyes moved a fraction. Nikolai closed the distance in 3 steps. He hit Victor before Victor's hand reached the weapon at his hip. A straight drive that snapped Victor's head back, followed by the weight of his whole body going forward, and they crashed into the side of a steel container hard enough to ring it like a bell. Victor was not small and Victor was not soft. He got his hands into it immediately, and what followed was not choreography, not the clean violence of cinema, but the ugly grinding work of 2 men who had both sustained and dealt more damage than they wanted to think about, fighting in the specific way of people who learned early that there was no elegant way to hurt someone, and the only thing that mattered was not stopping. Victor got an elbow into Nikolai's ribs that compressed the breath out of him in a grunt. Nikolai got his forearm across Victor's throat and used the container behind them as a wall. Victor's knee came up. Nikolai turned and took it on the thigh instead of where it was aimed. Something in his thigh screamed and went half numb. The catwalks erupted. Petrov and Crane were inside and moving, and the men Victor had positioned up high suddenly had problems that weren't Nikolai. Shots fired, 2, 3, from different positions, the echoes in the steel building turning each one into 5. Victor's remaining ground-level crew moved, and Alexei, who had come through the main gate 6 seconds after Nikolai and stayed low in the shadows of the containers, moved to meet them. Nikolai and Victor fell. The floor was concrete, and it was not kind. Victor landed on top and used the position. A fist that hit Nikolai's cheekbone and turned his vision white for a full second, long enough for Victor to get to his feet and get the gun out. Nikolai was still on one knee when he looked up at it. Victor was breathing hard, blood from his nose already swelling on one side of his face. His eyes were bright with the specific wildness of a man who has carried something for so long he has forgotten what he looks like without it. 3 years, Victor said. His voice was thick, unsteady. You took everything. My people, my territory. You sat across that table from me and you watched me sign it all away and you didn't even... He stopped. The gun didn't waver. You didn't even look like it mattered. That's what I couldn't forgive. You destroyed my world and you looked bored. I wasn't bored, Nikolai said. Then what? I was trying not to be you. He said it simply, without heat. I was sitting across from a man who built something through violence and lost it through violence, and I was trying to figure out if that was the only way it could go, whether that was how it always ended. He met Victor's eyes. The gun was 18 inches from his face. I still don't know. Philosophical. Victor steadied the gun. To the end. Victor? Nikolai's voice dropped. Listen. The facility had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that only arrives when a fight ends. Victor heard it a half second after Nikolai said it, and in that half second his eyes moved. One involuntary sweep of the space around them, the catwalks, the ground floor, the shadows between the containers. His people were down, not dead. Petrov and Crane worked with professional precision, not brutality, but contained. The numbers had collapsed. It was just them. Victor's hand tightened on the gun. A man who has lost everything twice can make one kind of decision at a moment like this. Victor's jaw set. It ends here, Victor said. One way or another. It ends here, Nikolai agreed. Question is what shape you're in after. I'm the one holding the side door, a secondary access panel in the container wall to Victor's left, opened. Victor turned. Reflex, pure reflex, the gun tracking the movement. Lena Hartwell stepped through the door. She was not supposed to be there. She had told Tolly she needed air, and she had gotten out of the car 6 blocks away, and she had walked. Not run, walked. Because running attracts different attention than a woman moving with purpose through an industrial area at midnight. And she had found the secondary access that Petrov's route had left unsealed, and she had used it. She stood in the open door with the cold air from outside moving around her, and she looked at the gun now pointed at her and then at Victor Sorin, and then at Nikolai on one knee on the floor with blood on his face, and she did not run. You told me I was a mechanism, she said to Victor. Her voice came out steady in a way that surprised even her. A lever you built to move something else. You spent 3 years and destroyed my family to create one tool for one purpose. She took one step into the building. That's a lot of effort for a person you just called irrelevant. Victor stared at her. The gun moved between her and Nikolai, and in the half second it took for him to decide which direction to commit to, something crystallized on his face. The specific frustration of a man whose perfect plan has acquired a variable he never modeled. You should not be here, Victor said. No, I shouldn't be anywhere in this situation. My father shouldn't have had 2 strokes. The hotel shouldn't have been destroyed. None of this should have happened. She kept walking, slow and deliberate, closing the distance in a way that was either extremely brave or something that had moved past bravery into a place that didn't have a name. But here we are. Stop moving. She stopped. 8 feet from Victor, 6 feet to Nikolai's right. You said you wanted him to understand loss, she said. That was the whole point. Not power, not territory. You wanted him to feel what you felt when everything collapsed. She held Victor's gaze. So, look at him. He's on the floor of a building that smells like rust and his leg's not working right and his face is bleeding. How does it feel? Victor's breathing was audible now, ragged. The gun arm had tensed and trembled almost imperceptibly. The physical toll of holding something extended, holding it in the cold, holding it at the end of 3 years of holding everything too tight. Is this what you wanted? Lena asked. Quiet now. Not accusatory. Something almost like real curiosity. Is this what it was supposed to feel like? Victor looked at her, and for one fraction of a second, one unguarded sliver of a moment, something passed across his face that was neither threat nor cruelty nor the focused obsession she'd heard in his voice on the phone. Something underneath all of it. Something that looked like a man who had been moving for so long toward a single point that he had never once imagined what it would feel like to. Victor Soren stood in the center of a building he had chosen for its symbolism and its kill angles and its proximity to the water where things could be made to disappear, and he looked at Lena Hartwell standing 8 feet away from him, and something in his face came undone. Not all of it. Not the whole architecture, just one part, one small structural element that had been underload for 3 years and had finally reached the limit of what a thing can hold before it stops holding. The gun was still up, his arm was still extended, but the angle had dropped 2 degrees the way a person's shoulders drop when they exhale after holding a breath too long, and Lena saw it, and did not move, and did not look away. I had a son, Victor said. Nobody in the building made a sound. 7 years old. He used to wait at the window when I was late coming home. His voice had changed. The performance quality was gone, the cultured ease, the precision, and what remained was something rougher and older. When everything collapsed, when your people moved in and took the territory and froze the accounts, and I had nothing, his jaw worked. My wife took him. Went to her family. I haven't seen him in 3 years. Nikolai, still on one knee, said nothing. You didn't just take my empire, Victor said. Not to Lena, to Nikolai. Only to Nikolai, as if she had ceased to exist as anything other than a witness. You took my life. The actual life, the parts that were... He stopped, swallowed. I thought if I could take yours, the thing you were building, the person you... He looked at Lena then, and the look was not threatening. It was something exhausted and specific, the look of a man identifying his own miscalculation in real time. I thought it would be an exchange, even the scales, but you can't... Victor. Nikolai's voice was quiet and entirely without victory in it. Put it down. You don't get to tell me. I'm not telling you. I'm asking you. Nikolai shifted his weight. His leg was bad. She could see it in the way he redistributed, the small compensation his body made automatically. He got 1 foot flat on the floor and pushed himself upright, slowly, with the deliberate movements of a man making sure nothing reads as a threat. He stood. They were the same height. They looked at each other across 8 feet of concrete and 3 years of wreckage. Finish this, and you spend whatever you have left in a cell. Walk out, and you go find your kid. Victor's hand shook once, a single tremor that ran from shoulder to wrist and was gone. You think it's that simple? No, nothing about this is simple, but those are the options as they actually exist right now. Another tremor. The gun arm dropped another degree. My men are contained. Nobody's dead. That's still true right now, and if you put that down, it stays true. Nikolai's voice held no warmth, no manufactured compassion, just the flat, honest assessment of a man describing a road. Victor, it's done. The gun came down. Not all at once. Slowly, with the terrible slowness of a man releasing something that has been his entire reason for movement for 1,000 days. His arm descended by degrees, and when the weapon finally pointed at the floor, Victor's shoulders dropped with it, and he looked suddenly smaller than he had at any point in the evening. Not diminished exactly, but evacuated, the specific deflation of a person whose purpose has just walked out of the room. Alexei came out of the shadows. He took the weapon from Victor's hand with a care that was almost respectful. Victor didn't resist. He stood in the middle of the floor of the Harker Street facility with his hands empty and his face a wreck of dried blood and exhaustion, and something that on another night, in another life, might have looked like relief. Lena walked to Nikolai. She didn't do it carefully. She crossed the distance in 4 steps and stood in front of him and looked at the cut above his cheekbone that was bleeding steadily and the way he was weighting his right leg to compensate for what the left one was telling him. "You should have stayed in the car," he said. "The car was boring." The muscle at the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Something that had the same architecture as a smile, but had been built under pressure and came out shaped differently. She reached up and pressed her palm flat against the side of his face, against the damage, steady pressure the way you apply to something that's bleeding. His hand came up and covered hers. Not to move it, just to keep it there. They stood like that for a moment in the middle of the building while the night completed itself around them. The federal contacts Nikolai had described to Alexei were made through a chain of 2 intermediaries, neither of whom used full names on the call. By 3 in the morning, vehicles that were not police vehicles and were not marked with anything identifiable had arrived at the Harker Street facility and departed with Victor Sorin and 6 of his crew. Nikolai did not ask Lena to leave the room during the conversation with the federal representatives, 2 quiet men in civilian clothes who spoke to Nikolai with the specific deference of people who have a long and complicated relationship with a source they find distasteful and indispensable in equal measure. Victor's organization was dismantled over the following 2 weeks. Not loudly. The kind of dismantling that happens without press releases, that shows up in court filings 6 months later as charges against people the public has never heard of. Supply chains severed, accounts frozen. Properties seized through legal instruments that had apparently been prepared well in advance of anyone needing them. Marcus Vale was found in a city 400 miles away, in an apartment rented under his wife's maiden name. He was returned, and Nikolai had a conversation with him behind a closed door that lasted 40 minutes, and Lena did not ask what was said, and Nikolai did not tell her. What she knew was that Marcus was alive and that certain arrangements had been made regarding his family's security and relocation, and that the look on Nikolai's face afterward was the look of a man who has done something necessary that he will not be able to not think about. 3 things happened in the month after Harker Street that Lena measured the way she had measured days at the beginning. Not on any calendar, just in the private ledger she kept behind her eyes. The first was her father. Gerald Hartwell was moved to a new facility under a different name for 6 weeks, a precaution that turned out to be unnecessary, but that nobody regretted taking. When the threat had fully collapsed, when the last of Victor's network had been accounted for, Lena took him back to the Meridian and sat beside his bed for 3 hours while he slept. She watched him breathe, the steady, reliable labor of it, in and out, the chest rising and falling. She had not understood until recently how much of her life had been spent watching the people she loved for signs of their continued existence. He woke in the afternoon. He looked at her for a moment with the drowsy focus of someone returning from deep sleep. And then his eyes cleared. "You look different," he said. "I've had a difficult month." "No." He shook his head slowly, the way he moved now, everything deliberate. "Not difficult, different. You look like—" He stopped, searching for the word with the patience of a man who had learned since the strokes to be patient with language. "You look like your mother when she'd made up her mind about something." Lena looked at her hands. "She used to sit in the kitchen at night." "Yes. I do that now too." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "The hotel. Bookings are up. The East Wing renovation starts next week. I hired a manager. She's good. Better than me at the operational end." "You hate the operational end." "I hate the operational end." He smiled. The left side of his face still moved slower than the right, but the smile reached both eyes. "Your mother designed this hotel so people could rest in it. She used to say a good hotel doesn't make you forget your life. It makes you remember why you wanted one." He looked at her. "Are you resting?" She thought about it honestly. "Getting there." He reached out and covered her hand. His grip was stronger than it had been in months. The physical therapy was real. The progress was real. And looking at his hand over hers, she thought about how much had been built and broken and rebuilt in the span of a few months, and how the rebuilt version was not the same shape as the original, but was possibly more solid in some places. "This husband of yours," Gerald said. "Dad, I'm not asking for details. I'm asking one question." He held her gaze with the focused attention of a man who has learned to conserve his sharpness for what matters. Does he see you? She thought about the kitchen at 2 in the morning, the blanket in the hallway, the way he'd said come back and she'd said it like a command and he'd said okay, like it was a covenant. Yes, she said. He sees me. Gerald nodded, settled back against the pillow. Good. That's the whole thing, you know. All the rest is furniture. The second thing was the divorce papers. They appeared on the desk in the study on the 47th day after Harker Street, placed there by Alexei at Nikolai's instruction, because the 24-month timeline had a mechanism that required initiation, and the mechanism did not initiate itself. 2 copies. Signature lines at the bottom of each, flagged with small adhesive tabs in the way that documents are flagged when someone wants to make sure you don't miss where to sign. Lena found them when she came to return a book she'd borrowed from the shelf behind the desk. She stood and looked at them for a long time. The late afternoon light came through the window and lay flat across the pages, and the pages were very white and very formal and contained language about the dissolution of a marital arrangement entered into on a specific date in front of a specific court. She left them there. Nikolai came home at 7. She heard him in the entry hall, heard the particular sound of a man who had spent years moving through spaces where sound was a liability, arriving into a space where he was no longer being careful. She had learned, in the past weeks, to recognize the difference. He came into the study. He saw her in the chair near the window. He saw the papers on the desk. He stopped. They're there, she said. Yes. Alexei placed them. I told him to. He crossed the room and stood at the desk, looking at them the way you look at something you put in motion a long time ago that has now arrived at its destination. The timeline. 47 days early, she said. I know, but the mechanism, you wanted them there? She wasn't accusing, she was identifying. There was a difference, and she understood them both well enough to use each precisely. Nikolai was quiet for a moment. His hand rested on the edge of the desk, not touching the papers. I wanted you to have the option at any point. I should have done it earlier. Why didn't you? The pause was brief. Because I didn't want you to take it. The room held that. Lena looked at him across the fading light, across the study that had been his for years before she arrived in it, with one suitcase and a contract and the specific desperation of a woman who had run out of every other door. She thought about the woman she'd been in the courthouse in a department store dress, the math she'd done at midnight, the way she had measured her own survival in days and options, and how many choices remained. She stood. She crossed to the desk. She picked up the papers. And she put them in the drawer, not in the recycling, not torn in half, which would have been dramatic. In the drawer, the second drawer down on the left side, where she'd noticed Nikolai kept things he wasn't done with yet but wasn't ready to act on. She placed them inside and closed the drawer with a small click. Nikolai watched her do this. She looked up at him. I want to renegotiate the contract. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly. Something more like a man who has been holding himself at a particular tension for a long time and has just felt something in the mechanism give. Renegotiate, he said. The terms as written include a 24-month timeline and a settlement and a clean dissolution. She kept her voice even. I want to strike the timeline, and the settlement, and the dissolution clause. He was very still. I want to keep the separate living quarters clause, she added, for approximately another 3 weeks, at which point I'd like to renegotiate that one too. The muscle at the corner of his mouth moved. 3 weeks. I'm operating on a reasonable timeline. What happens in 3 weeks? I finished the East Wing renovation walkthrough, and I stopped smelling like drywall every evening. She held his gaze. And you stopped sleeping 4 hours a night because you've been running security audits until 3 in the morning instead of just... She stopped. Being here. Nikolai looked at her for a long moment. The study was going dark around them. The afternoon light finished, the lamps not yet on. In the half-dark, his face was just a face, unguarded by the specific performance of daylight. And what she saw in it was not the man from the Elysian Club, or the man at the desk with the phones, or the man who stood at the top of a political and criminal landscape with the contained authority of someone who had earned his position through methods that didn't get written down. What she saw was the boy who learned to sleep light because sleeping heavy cost you things, who had built walls so efficient and well-maintained that he'd forgotten they were walls, who had looked at a woman in a courthouse and offered her a contract because certainty was the only language he trusted, and who had spent 47 days looking at divorce papers on a desk and not picking up a pen. "Okay," he said. Just that. The same word he'd said in the facility when she told him to come back. The same covenant dressed in the same simplicity. She moved toward the door to go up to her room, and his hand caught hers. Not grabbing, just contact. The specific, deliberate touch of a man who has calculated every movement his entire life, and is choosing, for once, not to calculate this one. She stopped. They stood in the dark study with their hands connected and the city outside the window doing what the city always did, indifferent and bright and ongoing, and neither of them spoke because there was nothing left to negotiate. The third thing happened 6 weeks later. It was not dramatic. Nothing announced it. No specific event precipitated it, which was how Lena knew it was real. The absence of incident. The unremarkable quality of an ordinary evening that held something extraordinary in it, purely because everything ordinary had become, without her fully noticing, also his. She was in the kitchen, not because she couldn't sleep. She had been sleeping, actually sleeping, the deep, reliable kind that comes when your nervous system has finally accepted that the threat level has dropped. She was in the kitchen because she wanted tea, and the kitchen was where you made tea. Nikolai came in at 11:30 and stopped in the doorway when he saw her. "You're awake," he said. "I'm making tea." "I know what you're doing." Then it wasn't really a question. He came in. He went to the cabinet and got a glass and filled it at the sink and stood at the counter, and they were in the positions they'd been in months ago, 6 feet apart, the kitchen holding them in its honest light. Except that everything was different now, in the specific way that geography can be identical while the territory it describes has entirely changed. "The hotel had its first full-capacity weekend," she said. "I know, I saw the numbers." She looked at him. "You saw the hotel numbers." "I track your interests." He said it without apology or embarrassment. "I've been tracking them for a while." "How long?" "Longer than is probably—" He stopped. "A while." She turned toward him. He turned toward her. The 6 feet between them had been 6 feet for months, maintained by the specific territorial agreement of two people managing something fragile. And it occurred to her, standing in the kitchen her mother would have called the honest room, that they had both been very careful for a very long time, and that care had served its purpose, and the purpose was complete. She crossed the 6 feet. She stood in front of him and looked at him the way she had learned to look at him, past the controlled surface, past the managed distance, into the specific human territory that lay beyond all of it. "The contract is in the drawer," she said. "I know where the contract is. I put it there instead of tearing it up because—" She stopped, found the words. "Because I wanted it to be a choice, not a destruction, not a thing that was just ended, a thing that was replaced," he said. She looked at him. "The drawer is where you put things that are replaced," he said, "not things that are over." She absorbed this. He was right. She hadn't known that's what she'd meant when she did it, but she had meant exactly that. She reached up and put her hand against the side of his face, the healed side now, the scar that had closed into a thin, pale line above his cheekbone. And he turned into it the way he had in the facility, not leaning, just allowing, receiving. The specific surrender of a man who has been managing his own weight for so long that the offer of something else to lean against arrives as almost disorienting. "I spent 8 months doing math at midnight," she said quietly, adding numbers that didn't add, trying to find some combination of available choices that came out to something survivable. She held his gaze. "You were not in any of my calculations." "No." "You should have been terrible. You should have been everything I was afraid of. You should have been the transaction you told me you were and nothing else." "I tried," he said, and the way he said it, dry, very slightly rueful, made her want to laugh, and she almost did. "I know you tried," she said. "You were very bad at it." "Yes." She lowered her hand from his face, and he caught it before it dropped, and held it. His fingers around hers, warm and deliberate and without the performance of anything. "The hotel," she said. "My father, the East Wing renovation." She paused. "Everything I came into this with. It's whole." "Yes." "What's whole for you?" He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, considering. "I've been asking myself that for a while." He looked at their joined hands and then at her. "I think I'm still figuring out what that looks like. I haven't spent a lot of time trying to answer that question before." "That's honest. I told you, the kitchen." She did laugh then. Small, real, nothing performed about it. And something in his face opened like a window being raised after a long winter. Not wide, not dramatic, just the specific relief of air. "We figure it out," she said. "Together. That's a new contract. No paperwork, no timeline, no dissolution clause." He was quiet for a moment. "Those were my terms. These are mine." He looked at her. She looked back. And Nikolai Vasov, who had spent 32 years controlling every variable of every situation he entered, who had built an empire on certainty and managed every risk and never once signed anything without understanding all the terms, said, "Okay." Outside the kitchen window, the city did what it always did. Traffic moved, lights shifted, rain started again, or maybe it had never stopped. The way it never really stops in that city. Just pauses and resumes and keeps returning, unremarkable and persistent and necessary, falling on the hotel and the care facility and the port district and the house on the hill, falling on everything that had been broken and was in the process of becoming something else. Irina found them in the kitchen at midnight and made a sound with her throat that managed to convey both disapproval of people standing in her kitchen when they should be sleeping and something warmer underneath, and went back down the hall. Lena made the tea. Nikolai drank it, even though she knew he didn't like tea, and didn't say so, and the not saying so was the kind of small, deliberate choice that doesn't have a name, but builds, over time, into the foundation of something real. The contract in the drawer was never thrown away, but it was never opened again either. It stayed where she put it, replaced, not ended, the way certain chapters of a life don't close so much as they change their nature, becoming the ground that the next thing grows from. 6 months later, when Lena was reorganizing the study for reasons that had nothing to do with contract terms, and everything to do with the fact that she had moved a lamp she preferred from the library and needed the desk drawer for something else, she came across it. She held it for a moment. The paper had the slightly formal weight of an official document, heavy stock, the kind that's meant to signify importance. She thought about the courthouse, 11 minutes, a navy dress, a board clerk. She thought about the blanket in the hallway. The kitchen at 2 a.m, a man on one knee on a concrete floor saying, "I won't walk out," because she'd told him to come back. She put the contract back in the drawer. Some things you don't destroy. You just let them mean something different than they used to. Nikolai found her at the desk when he came in that evening. She was working on hotel logistics, occupancy projections, renovation budget reconciliation, the particular mathematics of a building returning to life. The drawer was closed. He went to the kitchen and came back with 2 cups of something that was not tea but was warm, and set one at her elbow and sat in the chair across the desk. She looked up. He looked back. Outside the window, the city glittered beneath cold rain and neon lights. The same lights it always had, indifferent and bright and ongoing. But inside the room, in the specific warmth of 2 people who had found their way to the same table through wreckage and bad faith, and choices made without all the information, and one long, exhausted midnight conversation about what it means to be hungry. Inside that room, the city's indifference didn't reach. The lamp she'd moved from the library cast its light across the desk, across the papers, across the man who had once offered her a contract in a room full of glass and shadow, and who now sat across from her holding a cup of something warm with the quiet ease of a person who had, slowly and against his nature, and without quite planning to, arrived somewhere he intended to stay. She went back to her numbers. He picked up a book. The rain came down outside. And that was enough. That was, in fact, exactly enough.